What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14. Now, keep in mind, this is not the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G. That is a completely separate device. This is the 4G version of the phone. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. And also, I do want to point out, despite the things I'm going to be going over in this video, I don't really think this is a terrible phone. Sure, it does have plenty of drawbacks, but there are plenty of good things about it too, so definitely take everything here with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, a lot of these cons may or may not be a big deal to you. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is the processor. Now with this phone, unlike its 5G counterpart, which is honestly pretty fast for what it is, with the A14 4G, this phone is a bit on the slower side. Now with this device, we are getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G80 processor, and to be fair, compared to the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G, which was honestly a super slow phone, the A14 4G is a little bit faster, but honestly for what a lot of people are going to be using their phones for nowadays, the performance on this phone might not be the best. Sure, for more basic activities, it does at least get the job done if you're doing some light social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe playing some simple games like Candy Crush or Angry Birds. It will get the job done, but if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, you will notice it's definitely not the fastest phone out there. And considering you can spend just a tiny bit more and get something that's a lot faster, for the performance, the actual value you get for the money with this phone definitely comes into question. Now another thing I do want to point out is that with this phone, although it does have the MediaTek Helio G80 and 4GB of RAM, depending on the version you get, the processor might be a little different. As of the recording of this video, I haven't seen it actually being directly offered from US carriers, but there's a pretty good chance that by the time you're watching this, the US version might already be out. So just keep in mind the processor might be slightly different, but at the end of the day, most likely the performance will be more or less the same. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device, because depending on what you have, it may or may not be an upgrade, and honestly, seeing this, for most people it probably won't be an upgrade, but again, compared to the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G, it is at least a little bit better. But honestly, if you're going out of your way to spend money on a new phone, you might as well get something that actually has good performance. But at the end of the day, if you're really just looking for something for more basic use anyway, it might not be that bad for you. My second reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is the materials. Now with this phone, on one hand, the build quality is at least decent. The phone doesn't feel like it's gonna fall apart or anything, but keep in mind, aside from the glass display, the phone is made entirely of a cheap plastic, and there's some phones that don't have the most premium feel, but with the A14, honestly, this feels pretty cheap. And unlike a lot of higher end phones that have metal and glass, I feel like if you drop this phone, it's gonna completely fall apart. And obviously, while most people are probably not planning on dropping their phones, if you're in maybe a rougher environment, if you're working outside for example, things can always happen. So if you get this phone, I definitely do recommend getting a case and probably a screen protector too, because despite not being the absolute worst I've seen, the materials on this phone are definitely not the best. My third reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is because it doesn't have NFC. Now one thing I do want to point out here, there is a possibility that once US carriers start to get this phone, there actually might be a version that does have NFC, so if your carrier does, then you can ignore this, but this phone in my hand does not have NFC. This is the factory unlocked version that's pretty much the international version, so definitely keep that in mind. But all the same, at this point in 2023, a phone not having NFC is definitely a drawback, considering, at least in the US, I want to say almost every store nowadays is going to have some sort of tap and pay, and unfortunately without NFC, you can't use tap and pay. So missing out on that feature, whether you use it now or not, it definitely is a bit of a drawback, because even if you don't use it now, maybe you want to try it out in the future. Well, if your phone doesn't have NFC, of course, you can't even do that. So just keep in mind, if you do like to use tap and pay, you might want to avoid this phone, or at least if you're getting this phone through a US carrier that might have slightly different specs, definitely check to make sure whether or not this phone does have NFC before buying it, because if it doesn't, you could always get the A14 5G, and I know for a fact that phone does have NFC, but the A14 4G, or at least this one in my hand, again, does not have NFC. My fourth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is because it doesn't have stereo audio. Now, in case you don't know what that means, when a phone does have stereo audio, if you're doing something like watching a video, for example, sound is going to come out of both the main speaker and the earpiece, giving you a much more immersive experience. But unfortunately with this phone, sound only comes out of the main speaker, and the earpiece is really just for calls, so in general, when you're consuming content without headphones, things definitely don't sound nearly as good. Now, whether or not this really matters definitely depends on how you're actually using your phone. I know for me personally, I like to watch YouTube videos without actually really watching them. I'll like have something playing in the background on my phone itself. And in that kind of situation, obviously the phone speaker quality really matters a lot more. But if you never do that kind of thing without headphones, maybe you have your phone hooked up to a Bluetooth speaker all the time, or you're always using headphones, or maybe you just don't consume a lot of content in general. In that case, you might not really care about this, but honestly, I like to have a phone that has at least a decent speaker quality, and without stereo audio, I really can't say this phone does. So definitely something to keep in mind. Now, my fifth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is the overall design. Now, with this phone, honestly, in my opinion, despite the fact that, yeah, it is a lower end phone and you can really only expect so much, I feel like the design on this phone is just kind of clunky and really feels cheap. Compared to the A13 4G, for example, I feel like the A13 looks a lot nicer. This phone feels unnecessarily bulky. Again, the materials just aren't really the best, although the back material is at least decent looking. The bezels are a bit thicker than I feel like they should be, and with the front-facing camera, it has the typical water drop notch, which on one hand, Samsung has been doing this for quite a while now, but at the same time, there are phones that are honestly even cheaper than this, like the Motorola Moto G Play 2023, for example. They have much nicer looking hole punch designs instead. So overall, while it's definitely not the worst, I feel like when it comes to the overall design, Samsung really could have done a lot better. My sixth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is because it can't record 4K videos. Now obviously, if you're already familiar with entry-level phones like this is not going to be a surprise, and in that case, if you're considering a device like this, I'm sure you don't really care about this feature. But at the same time, if you have maybe an older flagship phone like a Samsung Galaxy S9 or an S10, then in that case, you might be expecting phones in 2023 to all be able to record 4K videos. And if that's something you're doing a lot of, then keep in mind, while having a pretty nice camera setup for what it is, this phone and really no phone in this price range can record 4K videos. At this point in 2023, although some mid-range phones can record 4K videos, when it comes to entry-level devices like this, that's really not a feature we're seeing yet. And then finally, my seventh reason why I might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14 is because it doesn't have a screen recorder. Now, this is really easy to fix because there are plenty of screen recording apps on the Google Play Store, so at the end of the day, it's really just an inconvenience, but I feel like it's really weird that this phone doesn't have a screen recorder. I mean, it's such a basic feature, and I thought pretty much every Android phone in existence would have it, but unfortunately the A14 doesn't for whatever reason. So if you do like to make a lot of screen recordings for some reason, then definitely keep this in mind. But those were my reasons why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A14. Again, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Khalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.